Welcome to the One Advantage podcast, exploring the intersections of peer power, culture, and agility. Your hosts, Jason Richmond, Mike Richardson, and Leo Bottary, co-founders of the One Advantage community of practice and Advantage peer groups. For more information, please visit us at idealoutcomesinc.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the One Advantage podcast. As you can see, you've got myself, Mike Richardson, and Leo Bottary today, the best of the best. Jason Richmond is off doing something else, somewhere else, no doubt with clients all over the place. And we're going to have a fun one today, Leo, because we are going to talk about your very own butterfly effect. For those of you that know what the butterfly effect is all about, listeners, it's the idea that small things can have non-linear impacts on a complex system. It's that idea that when a butterfly flaps its wings in Asia Pacific somewhere, we might get a hurricane here in the States or something like that. And we're going to talk about taking the time to revisit outdated policies or making it easier for employees to communicate and consult with people outside the direct reporting structure are two examples of small things that could have a big impact. Making changes may only have a minimal effect, or they may be the catalyst that ignites your workplace culture and makes employee engagement soar. That's what we're going to talk about. But first of all, in particular, when we've got Leo here, we need to know, where has Leo been over the last few weeks? Where have you been, Leo?
New York, basically, and that's been great. And then prior to that, I was in Denver for an entire week, which was wonderful. It was just a really great experience there, though. And, with the number of groups I spoke with, I actually had a meeting on Friday with basically all of the Vistage chairs in all of Colorado.
Okay.
So anytime you get that many smart people in a room, it's like that quote from JFK that not since Jefferson dined alone did we have that kind of brain power in a room, right? So it was, so that was really good. And I'm actually home for a bit now, and we'll go back out on the road basically June 8th, and I'll be traveling quite a bit through June.
Oh, cool. Well, I haven't.
How about yourself?
Yeah, I haven't been physically traveling anywhere, but I have virtually. Lots of calls and things with people all over the world. Working with a client, did a webinar the other day with their team who are all over the country talking about agile leadership and management. And then I actually fly up in a couple of weeks to be with them up in Seattle for a physical sort of keynote, which I'm really looking forward to. So let's come to this topic then of your very own butterfly effect, small things that can make a big difference. I've got a few in mind that I will share as I go along here. But Leo, do you have something in mind that you wanted to start with?
Well, certainly, let's be clear that the butterfly effect is not something I coined by any stretch of the imagination. However, but it's something actually that I talk quite about in peer innovation, and I referred to the work of Peter Senge back in the early 90s with a book called The Fifth Discipline, where he talked to us about systems thinking. And the fact is that we don't always understand how we can make a small change in our department and not realize it can have an adverse effect somewhere else. And oftentimes, because of the time it takes for that to occur, we can have a very difficult time actually tracing it back to to its origin. So these are the kinds of things that when we talk about culture, when we talk about peer innovation and communication and agility, none of that happens without really great communication and understanding what people do, what their requirements are, and to be, agile enough, knowledgeable enough to know that I need to check with this person, and this person, even though it may seem completely unrelated. The fact is, oftentimes things very much are.
Yeah, beautiful. I was doing this webinar, as I said earlier this week, and it was just really a little injection of inspiration to get them thinking before the main event in a few weeks' time. And I started to frame up, the whole agility challenge, and I did my whole piece around there are two kinds of simple. There's stupid simplicity, this side of complexity. There's complexity, and then there's elegant simplicity on the far side of complexity. So they love that. They've eaten that up. And I said, well, so what I did is I thought to myself, what is the most elegantly simple one thing that I wanted to give them to be thinking about in the run up to the event in a few weeks' time? And so I really thought long and hard about it. And I eventually distilled it down to just one very small word, everybody, the word and, A-N-D, and. And I started to sort of tease out different ways to explain the power of the and the one that I love to do most of all, Leo, is the whole design of a jet fighter plane as an and proposition of the airframe being very unstable and the fly-by-wire system being very stable. And when you bring those two things together as an and proposition, you end up with one of the most agile things you can think about. So I started to engage them in really understanding all of the different ways and places in which having an and proposition mindset is so much more enabling than an or proposition mindset. And I sort of articulated to them that we are surrounded by or thinking and or mindsets, everybody. And you will hear it in the way that people ask you questions. Hey, boss, people or profit, which is the most important? Long-term or short-term thinking, boss? I can't do both. Which one do you want me to prioritize on? Leadership or management? What do you want me to spend my time on? You'll hear it. Clearly in questions like that actually use the word or. And sometimes, the word or just isn't there, but it really is, quietly in between the lines. And I don't know about you, Leo, but my experience is that we are educated to be analytical or proposition thinking machines, right or wrong, up or down, black or white, profit or loss, and so for me, everybody, that is one thing, one tiny, tiny, tiny little thing that if you can just sort of delete, or thinking and the word but, right? The word but is or thinking, and pivot to and thinking. In my experience, it changes a lot. Does that resonate with you, Leo?
Very much so. In fact, it makes me think of one of probably the more famous, if you will, and or propositions that we run into all the time is it can't be high quality and inexpensive.
Right.
Can't have both. You're either getting one or the other. You're either getting something that's cheap or you're getting something that's going to, right? It's that thing. And the reality is that it reminds me, now, of course, there's a lot of brands that have been successful at doing this, but think about how Warby Parker disrupted the eyewear market, right? When people were going to Lens Crafters, Pearl Visions, paying $500-$600 more for these designer frames and all this other stuff, Warby Parker finally saw it and he said, you know what? We can sell you a pair of eyeglasses for $95, frames, lenses, and all, single vision, right? And by the way, not only are we going to do that, we're going to give a pair to someone in need. So now, basically, for half of $95 here, I'm now getting a pair of quality eyewear. And you think, well, how is that possible? Well, recognizing that the and/or proposition is so much a part of our psyche. Warby Parker has about a 2-minute video on YouTube that I'd love for people to watch. And it shows them how they make their glasses, the care, the technology, everything that goes into doing what they do. So, because you can't square that these $95, I mean, they've got to be cheap.
How can that be?
Right? You can't do that. So
right.
You get the behind the scenes look at what that's about. And it's extraordinary. And
love that.
You watch that and you're like, man, what in the world? And now you're mad at the people that were charging you 5 and 10 times, what you.
I love
the
that
cost of what you could be paying. And so it's exceptionally well done. And I think it reminds us that when we are in the workplace, it's not unreasonable when someone says, okay, do you want this or that? And to say, well, how can we get both? How can we get this and that? And at least entertain that option. Is it possible? Always? Of course not. But if we're always asking that question, I think it becomes a very powerful way to think and open up our minds.
Yeah, what popped for me, everybody, is how about if you got your team in a room, stood in front of a whiteboard, and you start to mind map with the team, and in the middle bubble, you write the word or. And you start to mind map all of the dimensions that you tend to wrestle with as an or proposition, rather like Leo just said. Well, it can be big or small. It can be light or heavy. It can be high quality or low quality. And you just sort of mind map all of these things around, and price and delivery and service and all of that kind of stuff. And then you cross out the word or, and you insert the word and in that middle bubble. And now you immerse your people in asking exactly the question that Leo just asked, which is, how can we have the best of all worlds? And what kind of out of the box, paradigm shifting, new insight thinking, having to face down that new puzzle now and crack that code in new ways, could you potentially be your own butterfly effect a la Warby Parker? I'd love you to send that link, Leo, and we'll put that in the show notes, everybody.
I will do that.
Yeah. Another one, Leo, that you won't be surprised about at all for me, when I look back over the course of my career, something I have done probably now for at least 30 years, 33 years. I think the first time I did this was 1990. I became 1994. That's right. So nearly 30 years. I became a managing director, aka president, CEO, for the very first time of a company in the UK. I'm English originally, everybody. And I walk in, the first day that I'm a managing director for the first time. It's a high technology aerospace company. And I get recruited. I'd been a sales and marketing VP before that. I got headhunted away to take on this new role. And I knew it was a turnaround. They told me it was a turnaround. I knew it was a turnaround. But by the end of the first day, I had discovered that it was like 3 times worse.
It always is. It's always worse
than they'd led me to believe. And I remember going back to the hotel, staying in a hotel locally and drinking a beer in the bar that night. And I remember sort of breaking out into a cold sweat that, oh my gosh, this is my first time out as a managing director. It's 3 times worse than I realized. I'd never done a turnaround before. And I was sitting there thinking, gosh, what am I going to do here? I mean, I'm relocating my family. I'm selling houses. I'm buying houses. I've bet my career on this whole thing. And my mind went back to when I used to work on offshore oil and gas drilling rigs. And we were in the flow of heavy operations and changing weather and getting stuff, downhole and offloading stuff from supply boats in heavy seas and things like that. We're just in the flow of chaos, organized chaos, hopefully most of the time. And so what did we do? Well, every single day, and sometimes multiple times a day, we would have a stand-up meeting of all the key personnel. I was one of the 2 company personnel on board, and then there'd be various contractor personnel and different responsibilities. We'd have a stand-up meeting every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, every 3 hours or something, but at least once a day, to take stock of, okay, what's changed, what's new, what's broken, what's the weather forecast, who is on board, is not on board, when does the next helicopter arrive, when's the next supply boat arrive, what's working well, what's not working well, basically taking stock of everything. So I'm sat in the bar that night sweating bullets, and I think, why don't I just do that? So you know what I did the following morning? I walked in the following morning and I declared that we were going to have a daily stand-up meeting every single day with the top players, about 12 or 18 players. My office was quite, not small, but not tiny, but not large. But I said, we're just going to stand around the walls of my office, and I'm going to fill this whiteboard up over here, and we're going to turn this business around. So we did that every single day, Leo, forever. We never stopped doing it, because once I turned the business around, I realized it worked so well that I kept doing it. And then every job, every role that I had, every business that I ran from then, and every one that I've run since in a fractional role, including the ones I'm running today, we have weekly, if not daily, scrum meetings, stand-up meetings. And it's a small thing that when done right and done well, and it can easily be done wrong and it can easily be done poorly, but when done right and done well, it is the smallest thing that can make the biggest difference of all. So if you're not doing that, listeners, I invite you to think about that. What's your reaction to that one there, Leo?
Well, obviously, there's two things. One is small changes can have big impacts. It's not always about the grand strategy. It's not always about the executive leadership team going off to the Greenbrier for a week so they can come back and deliver the tablets for the rest of the staff, right? But you bring up a great point though with regarding this kind of and/or proposal or the options that people think they have. Okay, how many times have you been involved with a peer group meeting and someone brings a question that says, okay, I have choice between options A and B. What do you guys think, A or B? And what do you find out? There's option C, D, and E. When you enlist and engage the support of others.
That's right.
When you talk about those stand-up meetings, what you recognized obviously is you're not going to figure this out alone. You're not going to do this all by yourself. You need other people. You need their ideas. You need their buy-in. You need their involvement.
Right.
You need everything that's going to together make those kinds of things possible. And I think when we look at, in many respects, there are certainly kind of, unintended results that can be very positive, but oftentimes if we just have good communication with the people around us, we can avoid those butterfly effects that are problematic, right? That have negative consequences throughout. And, it's so great where you can open that dialogue, have that kind of inclusive leadership model that recognizes the gifts that people bring to that conversation. And that I think is magic. And that is so crucial and so much about what so many leaders and companies are facing today, trying to figure out in a post-COVID world, how do we remain productive? How do we make sure that our quality is going to stay this? It's going to be, our quality standards are going to be the same as they've ever been, if not higher. Are we going to live by our values? We're going to do these things. And by the way, we recognize that half of our folks are working from home, but you know what? We are going to be as or more productive. There's no trade-off here.
Yeah, I love that.
I
love that. I love that. And two things pop for me because you talked about in peer groups when you're processing issues and you think you've got options A and B and you get C, D, E. I'll come back to that in a minute because I think there's I had another simple thing on my list that comes out of that sort of environment. But before I go there, indeed, going back to the sort of daily, weekly scrum idea, everybody, one of the things I like to talk to people about is the micromanagement, right? Which is almost the definition of the butterfly effect having a big, impact. And of course, most people's reaction to micromanagement initially is bad, right? They think, hang on a minute, micromanagement has a bad reputation. Well, yes, bad micromanagement has a bad reputation, but everybody, a weekly scrum, a daily scrum is good micromanagement. It's, hey, let's take stock of all the small things, which if we don't catch them early, if we don't see them coming, if we don't head them off at the pass, they're going to turn into big things real fast. And so how do you be on top of what's called good micromanagement to have a positive butterfly effect and not let bad micro stuff get the better of you and create a bad butterfly effect? But I want to come back to the other one, Leo, in the peer forum idea, because that was another one I wrote on my list when I was preparing for this. And everybody, it's the smallest thing that can have the biggest difference. And Leo knows where I'm going with the concept of clarifying questions when we're processing issues or processing cases, and you've got a room full of peers, and one of the peers has brought the issue, and we're trying to now fully understand the issue and in all of its flavors and colors and levels and layers to invite these other options, C, D, and E, to sort of reveal themselves out of the shadows, right? The most powerful clarifying questions you can ask are open-ended and unloaded. Open-ended can't be answered with a yes or no. So don't ask, will you, did you, have you, because those are closed-ended. You can answer with yes or no. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. How are you? what are you, where are you, are open-ended questions. And then unloaded of any embedded answer. Most questions are not questions at all. They're statements of, hey, I've already got the answer. Have you thought about doing X, right? And in particular, unloaded of any value judgment, a roll of the eyes or a sort of what the heck, is just, it just destroys the whole flavor. And in the 15 years that I was facilitating forums, peer forums, and Leo was in one for many of those years, the most common thing that I would have to do as a facilitator is to remind everybody open-ended, unloaded, clarifying questions. And the number of times that I would have to stop someone midstream and say, you've just asked a closed-ended, loaded question. Could you take it back, unload it, open it up, and ask it again? The smallest things, Leo, can have the biggest impacts. What do you think?
Yeah, I always refer to those as question mendations, right? Have you ever thought about switching bakes? That kind of stuff. So that, but the other thing, I also want to get back to what you said, because language matters too. And so I'm going to just mention, because I know the micromanagement you're talking about. The unfortunate part is that people, when they hear the words micromanagement, they review it. It's top down. Someone's looking over my shoulder. Someone that.
Yeah.
I think, and I know because we've talked about this. What you're talking about is kind of creating a culture where you have a collective attention to detail. Yes. Right.
Beautiful.
Where everybody's looking at all of those because it matters. They recognize that the little things can make a big difference. That small miss somewhere can have that ripple effect. It can have that butterfly effect somewhere else. And if you can get everybody with the mindset that truly matters. You look at a lot of the best, I don't care if it's a symphony orchestra, a Broadway play, a great baseball team, basketball team, whatever, the attention to detail they have on everything is off the charts. And I think people, if they ever attended the rehearsals or the practices of that kind of a quality experience that we are treated to as audience or as spectators, you get exactly what you're talking about, that attention to detail is everything. And when we see those things go by the wayside and some team loses by 20 points, you're wondering, how did that happen? Well, it's embedded in all of those little things, all those little fundamentals, all those things that people didn't quite have the discipline to do during that particular moment, that causes the problem.
I love what you just said, and for two reasons, everybody. The idea of collective attention to detail, of course, opens up another angle here of collective intelligence that we'll talk about in a moment. And couldn't agree more with what you said, Leo. Collective attention to detail, good micromanagement. Everybody, next time you board a plane and you're about to turn right to go and find your seat, and you turn left, and there's laughing and joking going on in the cockpit, and sort of a blasé, kind of approach, and yeah, I think we're good, aren't we? Yeah, no, I think we're good. Yeah, we don't need to do the checklist. Nah, we're good. I would recommend you do a 180 and get off that plane. Now, you know, right, that the reason we have checklists, the reason that we go through the pre-flight, process that we go through in that cockpit, is to make sure that we don't miss anything small that can have the biggest of impacts, like, on final approach, oops, we forgot to put the landing gear down. That's happened, everybody. Or, oops, we're landing in the wrong airport. That's happened, everybody. How on earth does that happen where we're unaware that we're landing in the wrong airport or on the wrong runway, or not a runway at all? There was a famous approach at Heathrow Airport in London where a 747 was lining up on the circuit road around the airport, not the runway. It's like, how on earth does that stuff happen? And going back to the idea of the collective intelligence, everybody, we got to make sure that we are paying enough attention to the detail, so that we're not getting the opposite, which is collective unintelligence, to put it mildly. If we're not careful, we're experiencing collective stupidity, because we just don't have that attention to detail that we need. The smallest of things can have the biggest of impacts, everybody. Unfortunately, I came out of the field of flight safety in my aerospace days and have studied way too many aircraft accidents where it was the smallest of things that took the journey down, and we ended up with a smoking hole in the ground. The smallest of things that got missed can be just tragic. Leo, what do you think?
I think that when you walk by the cockpit and someone says, "I think that duct tape will hold," I think that that's a concern, right? That you just flat out have to just turn on your heels and get off that plane, because you don't want to be, in that hole in the ground that you're talking about that's smoldering.
Yeah, beautiful.
So yeah,
Beautiful.
that's what I think about.
Do you have any others, Leo, that come to mind? Small things that you would inspire our audience to think about that can have a big difference?
I think that one of the big lessons that I got, going back to kind of where we started here with Peter Senge's work, was it's all too often when, let's say that we've got sales, right? And they're humming along. And the next thing you know, sales start to dip. So what do most people do? Well, they double down on their sales effort, right? Because they got to get sales back to where they want. They address the action versus the limiting condition. There's a reason sales are holding back. And until you address that, and the problem with this becomes when you do double down on sales, you will get an initial spike. The problem is you still haven't addressed that underlying condition that is ultimately going to come back and bite you. So being open to those kinds of things and recognizing that it isn't turning on a light switch off and on. We live in a complex system. Our companies, our bodies, our universe, our planet, all of it is part of, just an unbelievable system. And I think once we choose to respect it and understand it and be not so arrogant that we communicate with people and we learn from one another. And that's how I think we have that attention to detail. That's when we recognize that the little things matter.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we lean into that, the better we can be.
Yeah, beautifully said. So that sort of idea of, how do you get beneath the surface of symptoms and effects and get down to sort of root causes and right down to the sort of almost the bottleneck, the bottleneck limiting factor, as you said. And I remember everybody, coming out of the aerospace business, that we'd have huge factory floors where we're doing a lot of metal cutting and goods inwards and goods outwards and final assembly and treatment plants and all of this kind of stuff, huge factory floors. And of course, when you're in that field of really understanding the sort of flow on a factory floor and you're leaning out the whole thing, what you go looking for, everybody, is you go looking for the bottleneck. Where is the bottleneck on the factory floor? There's only one. Right? Is that the most choking, limiting bottleneck in the whole process? Where is it? And you figure out where it is and you go de-bottleneck it. And as soon as you de-bottleneck that means that the bottleneck is now somewhere else. And so you have to sort of figure out, okay, where's the bottleneck gone now? And you have to track it down and figure out where it is. Okay, we found it. Now let's de-bottleneck that. And as soon as you do that, it goes somewhere else. And so you're constantly chasing often the smallest of things that has now become the bottleneck. And the moment that you de-bottleneck that, it's run off somewhere else. And now you're looking for the next sort of needle in a haystack of where's the bottleneck now. So that's a great reminder of kind of the constant butterfly effect that you're doing when you're doing that kind of stuff. I got one more. I do. Go ahead, Leo. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I was going to mention, of course, because I know we're getting near the end here as well, that, small things do matter. And one small thing that you can do that can have a big impact on your business is get yourself a copy of the One Advantage ebook.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. Yes. Available now, everybody. As a Kindle ebook up on Amazon. We'll put the link in the show notes. Get yourself a copy of the One Advantage ebook, how to introduce a peer-powered culture of agility into your organization. And my last little thing that I love to do, Leo, is around culture. One of the things I said on that webinar earlier this week was all roads lead to culture and core values, everybody. And do you have sufficiently granular core values that describe the behaviors that you want to see and hear around here, and the behaviors that you do not want to see and hear around here? And one of the simplest things I love to do when I work with teams is I love to facilitate them in creating their list of excuses. So yes, sure enough, they've got a poster up on the wall over there of their core values, and beside it, they've got a numbered list of excuses. I'm sorry, I'm late. The traffic was bad. Oh, you mean number one? Sorry, everybody, I was too busy. I didn't have time. Oh, you mean number two? It's the smallest of things, but it can change everything because it makes excuses something that become discussable, and you can create accountability around them. So there we have it, everybody. I'm sure if Jason was here, he would have a boatload of other things to add into the mix that we'll ask him about later. But your very own butterfly effect, everybody. Small things can make the biggest of differences. Check out some of the links that we'll put in the show notes. Thanks for being here, Leo. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here, everybody. We will see and hear you next time on the One Advantage podcast.
Thanks for listening to the One Advantage podcast. If you liked this episode, please consider helping us by rating us wherever you listen, spreading the word, having us as a guest on your podcast or webinar, and mentioning us in social media. Find us at the One Advantage podcast, where you can get more information about us and this episode. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to more great episodes to come.